Welcome, my dear devotees of the dark and curious. Tonight, I present to you a tale of intrigue, obsession, and terror. 5 friends, drawn together by a fascination with the unknown, dared to summon what should remain unsummoned. A simple game, they thought, a harmless thrill. But as you shall see, the whispers from the other side are never so kind. They unleashed a darkness that demanded blood, and one by one, they paid the price. What begins as a night of curiosity ends in despair and death. So, light your candles, lock your doors, and prepare yourselves for the whispering, because some games are never meant to be played. On Braeburn Street, where the lamplight barely touched the cobbled road, stood a shop that seemed forgotten by time. Curiosities of the unknown. Its cracked wooden sign hung from rusted chains, and the grimy windows revealed glimpses of peculiar treasures. Doll heads with staring eyes, faded books bound in leather, and brass trinkets whose purpose was a mystery. It was the kind of place people hurried past, inexplicably uneasy. Anna Trelawney didn't hurry past. She stopped, her breath fogging the glass as she peered inside. Something had drawn her here, though she couldn't say what. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and incense. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper emerged, a woman whose age was impossible to determine. Her long, bony fingers adjusted the folds of her violet shawl, her eyes a pale gray that seemed to pierce the gloom. Anna's friends followed reluctantly. Caleb, towering and broad-shouldered, cast wary glances at the shelves. Miriam clutched her sketchbook, her delicate features tense with unease. Jonas sauntered in with an exaggerated swagger, cracking jokes under his breath. Evelyn, bookish and sharp-eyed, stayed closest to Anna. "What are we even looking for?" Caleb grumbled. "We'll know it when we see it," Anna replied, and then she did. The Ouija board sat atop a low shelf, half hidden beneath a tarnished silver mirror. It was larger than most boards she'd seen, its wood dark and smooth, almost warm to the touch. The planchette lay on top, carved from some ivory-like material, its edges sharp. The letters on the board weren't merely painted, they were carved deep, the grooves filled with a substance that shimmered like liquid mercury. "Ah, the board," the shopkeeper murmured, her voice like a dry wind through dead leaves. "It finds those who seek." "Perfect for ghost hunting," Jonas said, elbowing Anna. "Is it real?" Anna asked. The woman smiled faintly. "Real enough. But take heed. It is not the board that speaks. It is what answers." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" The shopkeeper's pale eyes flicked to her. "Only that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." Jonas laughed nervously, but Miriam whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't." Anna bought the board anyway. As the group left, the shopkeeper's voice followed them, soft and unreadable. "Remember, it is not a game." The attic of Anna's house was steeped in history. It smelled of old wood and forgotten things, and the faint sound of rain pattered against the roof. By candlelight, the 5 friends gathered around the Ouija board, their faces half lit, shadows playing across the cracked plaster walls. "All right," Anna said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Fingers on the planchette." They obeyed, though not without hesitation. Caleb's fingers barely brushed the edge, his jaw clenched tight. Miriam's hands trembled, while Jonas grinned nervously. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, muttering, "This feels wrong." Anna began with simple questions. The planchette moved lazily at first, pushed by their collective fingers. But as the questions deepened, "Who are you? What do you want?" the movements became more erratic, more forceful. I am not a game, it spelled. The temperature in the attic dropped. Miriam shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter. We should stop, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Anna said, her eyes fixed on the board. We need to know. Your end, the board spelled. A sudden gust extinguished the candles. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the Ouija board itself, its letters flickering like embers. Jonas laughed nervously. Okay, who's messing with the lights? No one answered, and then they heard it. The sound of something scraping against the floorboards. The next day, Miriam retreated to her art studio, desperate for solace. She buried herself in her sketches, charcoal smudging her delicate hands. But as she worked, her drawings began to change. She had been sketching a peaceful forest scene, but now the trees twisted into monstrous shapes. Faces appeared in the shadows, staring with hollow eyes. Miriam tried to stop, but her hand moved of its own accord. The faces became more detailed, more horrifying, and then she heard it, a voice whispering her name. Miriam. She spun around, her heart pounding. The studio was empty, yet the whispering grew louder, filling her ears. The faces on the paper seemed to move, their mouths opening in silent screams. Something cold touched her neck. She tried to scream, but the sound was choked off. When her body was found hours later, her face was contorted in terror. Her sketchbook opened to a page where a single word was scrawled over and over. Run. Jonas, ever the joker, dismissed Miriam's death as a coincidence. She was already freaked out, he told the others. It's just stress. But that night, as he walked home through the woods, he felt it. A presence. The laughter died in his throat as the shadows seemed to deepen, to shift. Who's there? He called, his voice breaking. The trees whispered back, a sound like dry leaves rustling, and then he saw them, figures emerging from the darkness, their bodies indistinct, but their eyes blazing like coals. He ran. Branches clawed at his skin, the ground uneven beneath his feet. He tripped, falling hard. When he looked up, the figures were upon him, their hands, cold as death, clamped over his eyes. Jonas's screams echoed through the woods, cut short as his body was dragged into the darkness. When he was found, his eyes were gone, his empty sockets staring at nothing. Caleb took the board to the backyard, determined to destroy it. He doused it with lighter fluid, his hands shaking. Burn in hell, he muttered, striking a match. The flames roared to life, unnaturally bright, but as they engulfed the board, they turned on him. The fire climbed his arm like a living thing, wrapping around him, consuming him. He screamed, but the fire made no sound. It burned silently, leaving behind nothing but ash. The storm raged outside, a cacophony of wind and rain battering against the old Trelawney house. Anna and Evelyn sat in the dimly lit parlor, the Ouija board resting ominously on the table between them. Shadows from the fireplace danced across the walls, casting shapes that seemed almost alive. Anna stared at the board, her face pale and drawn, while Evelyn clutched a heavy tome of occult lore, her fingers trembling as she turned its brittle pages. "We can destroy it," Evelyn said, though her voice lacked conviction. She pushed her glasses up her nose, her eyes scanning the yellowed text. There's a ritual, something about binding the spirit to silence. "Binding it?" Anna whispered. Her voice was hoarse from days of fear and sleepless nights. "That thing can't be silenced. You've seen what it does." "We don't have a choice," Evelyn snapped, her voice cracking. "I'm not going to end up like the others." Evelyn stood, clutching the book tightly. "We need candles, salt, something personal from each of us." She paused, realizing they were the only ones left. Just something of yours and mine. Anna nodded wakely and shuffled off to gather what they needed. Evelyn set the book down on the table and began drawing symbols on the wooden floor with a piece of chalk, her hands moving quickly, her breath hitching with every gust of wind rattling the windows. The board watched her. She didn't see it move at first. The planchette shifted slightly, then stopped. Her focus was on the ritual markings, the chalk screeching softly against the wood. When she finally looked up, she froze. The planchette was pointing directly at her. Her breath caught in her throat. "Anna," she called, her voice trembling. The room grew colder. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its warm glow dimming until it was little more than a faint, flickering ember. Shadows crept along the walls, pooling in the corners and spreading like ink. Evelyn clutched the book tighter, the leather cool and slick beneath her sweating palms. "Anna," she cried louder, panic rising. The door to the room slammed shut with a deafening bang. Evelyn spun around, her heart hammering. The chalk in her hand snapped as she gripped it too tightly. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A figure, tall and indistinct, rose from the shadows. Its form wavered, like smoke in a draft, but its eyes, two voids that seemed to drink in all the light, were fixed on her. "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered, backing away. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, the air grew thicker, oppressive, as if the room itself were alive and suffocating her. The chalk circle she had drawn began to glow faintly, but the light was swallowed by the encroaching darkness. She opened the book, her hands trembling as she tried to find the page she had marked. Her voice was shaky as she began to read. "By the power of the ancient seal, I..." The words died in her throat as the figure surged forward, faster than her eyes could follow. It loomed over her now, its form solidifying into something grotesque, a mass of writhing limbs and mouths, its surface glistening like oil. Evelyn screamed, stumbling backward, but there was nowhere to go. The book fell from her hands as she clawed at the door, her nails splintering against the wood. The figure's limbs stretched out, impossibly long, wrapping around her legs and pulling her to the ground. Her screams echoed through the house, mingling with the sound of the storm outside. The board began to hum, its letters glowing faintly. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out a single word over and over. "Mine," Evelyn writhed, her hands grasping at anything within reach. The book lay just out of her grasp, its pages fluttering as though caught in an invisible wind. The figure's grip tightened, and she felt an icy cold spreading through her body, numbing her limbs and stealing the air from her lungs. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was Anna bursting into the room, her face pale with terror. Evelyn tried to call out, but no sound escaped her lips. The darkness consumed her, pulling her into its depths. When Anna reached her, Evelyn was gone. The only sign she had ever been there was the book lying open on the floor, its pages blank. The Ouija board sat untouched on the table, the planchette resting on the word goodbye. Only Anna remained. Haunted, sleepless, she returned to the antique shop. The shopkeeper greeted them with a thin smile. "Take it back," Anna begged, slamming the board onto the counter. "Please." The woman shook her head. "The board is yours. It chooses its owner." "Then how do I stop this?" Anna cried. The shopkeeper's pale eyes gleamed. "It must be sold. Giving it back to me won't help you. Even if you leave it here, it is still with you." Anna stared at the board, its surface glinting as if alive. She left the shop clutching it, her mind racing. The next day, a young couple wandered into the antique store. The shopkeeper smiled warmly. "Looking for something unusual?" she asked. Anna, watching from the shadows, wept.